My name is Scott Sissel. I have a couple roles in the firm. I lead our firm-wide internal audit services practice based out of Minneapolis. And I also have another role in that I head up our health systems segment practice as well. And I appreciate all of you joining today. This is part of a four-part series directed at the health systems segment, if you will. And related to those primarily working in internal audit and compliance, but we also realize that people have wear various hats at organizations, and certainly the information is pertinent to a variety of different functions. This is the second of our four-part series. The first session occurred back in August and kind of dealt with more of the top risks in the industry. For any of you interested, on October 29th, we have another session coming up around revenue cycle and using data and data analytics to help improve your operational internal audit and compliance functions. And then the series wraps up on November 8th, where we're going to talk about physician relationships and compliance risks related to those relationships. So appreciate people joining today. I am joined by two individuals, Michael and David, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Nugier, and as the screen says, I'm the Director of Cybersecurity Services. So I'm in charge of all the different cybersecurity services that Bailey has to offer our client base. And that ranges from three main groups: the advisory portion of cybersecurity, the technical assessment portion of cybersecurity, and the implementation portion of cybersecurity. Happy to talk about those at a different time if anybody's interested about learning about those. I carry with me about 20 years of IT and cybersecurity experience, half of which is in leadership and driving organizations to increase their cybersecurity posture, their cybersecurity hygiene. I'll go ahead and pass it to David to give an intro.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. I'm David Rowan. I'm a senior manager in our risk advisory services group. So I deal with all things risk related as it relates to cybersecurity. And so there's a heavy compliance component to cyber as well. And we're deeply involved with that. Background is I've been with IAD for over 5 years. And prior to that, it's been pretty much all consulting work with Big Four and other organizations.
Amy, if you want to advance the slide, I'll do a quick introduction for today's session. As we mentioned, today is going to talk about information and data security risks. We're going to talk a little bit about cybersecurity trends, effects of a cyber attack, best practices, and then dive into some of the other areas of control and processes, including HiTrust. Michael and David are the experts in these areas, and so they are going to really do the heavy lifting as far as presentation today. And again, the other thing I'd like to point out is to welcome everyone. This is kind of a kickoff of Cybersecurity Awareness and Security Month, which kicks off, which is next month. So you've got a little, maybe a week jump on that. With that, I'm going to kick it over to Michael and let him begin talking a little bit about cybersecurity.
Thanks, Scott. And so we'll start off, and I will touch on what Scott had just said as we get this polling question going. Has your organization or an organization you've worked for experienced a cybersecurity incident or breach? This is really good starting question to see what experience you have in this realm. So we'll give you a second to go on this. As you're answering, I'll touch on the Cybersecurity Awareness Month for October. There are a lot of initiatives that Bailey and a lot of organizations are doing during this month, webinars. So it's a great time to learn. We have several webinars scheduled on cybersecurity if you're interested, as well as a lot of data going out. So please visit our website, ibailey.com/cybersecurity to sign up and receive those. We have an ebook coming out to talk about best practices in cybersecurity, some of the things that we'll be touching on today. All right, looks like a pretty good split, 30-30-30 down the path here for these. So a lot of people have been impacted by a cybersecurity breach. Some haven't or don't know that they have, which is about normal. And as we move forward, we'll talk about what the statistics really are around that. And while your organization may or may not have been impacted by it, they may or may not have had to disclose that as well. And so we'll take a step back and talk about what is cybersecurity, and that's the protection of your IT systems, network data, just about anything that connects to the internet or stores data within your organization. And that's where we're focused on from a cybersecurity perspective, is protecting that and preventing attacks towards that. A cyber attack would be the malicious attempt to gain unauthorized access to those systems, to corrupt or steal data, cause some form of technical harm to the organization. And so as we move forward, we'll talk about what that process looks like. MITRE, there's an organization out there called MITRE, and they have built a framework or a cyber attack kill chain. It's several phases long. I take that and I like to boil it down because I want to talk about the core components of what happens in a cyber attack and how a cyber attack occurs. And there's 4 phases that we like to focus on. And the first phase is that recon. Second stage is exploitation. Third is persistence, and then fourth is getting the objective. And so recon is what we call information gathering. Inside of the cybersecurity realm, we call that OSINT gathering, or open source intelligence gathering. We want to make sure that we're getting what we need from a hacking perspective. And so there's a lot of sources that we use, mostly social media, Google searches, targeting specific employees of the organization, targeting specific data as people are posting things to the social media, seeing if we can find any information about what has occurred in the past from an attack perspective, or who's posted what on the internet, to see if we can gain some form of knowledge about the organization. This also helps prepare the cyber attacker and motivate them, right? If they're starting to gain a lot of information about this organization or your organization, they're going to get more motivated and find routes and paths for the exploitation phase, and it helps us customize those attacks. One example I can give around recon is I was on LinkedIn the other day, and an employee posted a full email with email address and the entire structure of the email for their anniversary. That provides fuel. It was for their anniversary, for their work anniversary at their organization. That provides fuel for an attacker to build a similar email, to build a phishing campaign, to phish the employees within the organization. A lot of organizations do gifts after 5, 10, 15 years. And so clicking a link inside of the email to get your gift, entering your password, it's an easy way for an attacker to gain access or credentials into an organization. And that leads to the exploit phase. Once we have our recon, we have to figure out what we're going to exploit from an attack perspective. Is it going to be technical, or are we going to start with human, right? Every organization has some form of public internet-facing presence. And so, right, you have a website, you have employees can log into email systems. There are certain web applications that you use, that you log into to access data and perform things remotely, or that are hosted by a third party. And so those are the technical arenas that we would go after from a cyber attack perspective. And then there's the human element. You often hear the term phishing. A lot of organizations do phishing and training and education around phishing. And there's some, that all boils up into what we call social engineering. So there's a physical aspect to that, where we can go into an organization and physically try and break through doors, social engineer people. We do things called tailgating, where if somebody opens the door, we exploit the kindness and humanity, which is they'll hold the door open for you so you can enter. And 9 times out of 10, it's usually not a situation where somebody checks for a badge or anything like that. And so the human element is often exploited from a physical perspective. The phishing perspective, as well as calling people to gain information, is a huge one, and that's called vishing. It's voice phishing. And then there's also text messages, and that's a huge area on the rise for cyber attackers. I actually, this week alone, I got like 7 of them. One that said check in for your flight, and it had a link in it, and I didn't have a flight. Another one said click here to track your package. I wasn't expecting a package, but who doesn't want to see what package they're trying to get and get information about that? And so that's the delivery mechanism we use, the social engineering. And I already mentioned the public system weaknesses. The vulnerabilities exist in all systems, all applications, all hardware, and those can be exploited. And so we can do scans to see what those are. And then there are some sophisticated compromises that we'll talk about in a little bit here on the next slide. Once we have created the exploit and started that exploit phase, if we gain access to the organization, we like to maintain persistence. And that means that if we do get access to a machine, one machine's not enough. If that person turns off their laptop, or if that person gets a new laptop or finds out that they've been hacked in some way, they can end our reign inside of the victim environment. And so we like to maintain persistence or build persistence. And we do that through identifying what other computers are on the network and trying to spread across the network as quickly as possible. And there's a couple ways to do that. Command and control is a common term, or C2 within the cybersecurity industry, where we will load some form of malware, some form of software that gives us access to connect to that device or multiple devices within the organization. We often like to live off the land from an attack perspective, and that's utilizing those native tools. So if there are tools on your system that do give us access to do certain things, we will try to utilize those as well. Once we have that persistence, we then have however long until we're caught to perform our objective. And that objective can be a lot of different things. It could be stealing data, it can be ransoming data, it can be extortion of that data, it can be a massive impact to the environment, which we call denial of service, or DDoS, whatever kind of impact we want to cause. And a lot of people think, well, I don't have any data that's that important. We're obviously talking to the healthcare industry, and the healthcare industry is governed by a lot of different compliances. And so data is vital to the healthcare industry, and it's vital to protect that because it is always sensitive data. And so extortion often exists in this industry, causing an impact as well. If you can't access certain systems within the hospital, you can't get access to patient records, you can't get access to life-saving information. And so having that denial of service is also a huge impact. And that could be the objective. Most of the time, the objective is financially motivated. And so we'll see that from a ransomware perspective, where they want you to pay and they create an urgency. If you don't pay in 5 days, we'll double the ransom and we'll release some of your records publicly. And so most of the time it's financially motivated, but there are times where it can be politically motivated, or some people just like to see the world burn and they want to cause outages. And so that's from a high level perspective, with a little technical in there, what an attacker is trying to perform when they're doing what they're doing. And that leads to headlines, right? We've all seen the headlines if we've watched the news. There have been several this year that have been huge. Colonial Pipeline, if you're from the East Coast or have been to the East Coast, there was a chance that you weren't able to get gas for a while because Colonial Pipeline was hit by ransomware, and that was around $4.5 million that they had to pay to recover from that. There was the JBS meatpacking plant, that was an $11 million one. The Kaseya attack, another supply chain attack that was upwards of requests of $70 million. And so you see a lot of these. And just last week, there was the an Iowa farmers co-op that was attacked, and I think their ransom is about $5.9 million right now. And so these things are happening in the news. We're only seeing the large ones, but on average, right, about 55% of organizations are going to experience some form of incident or breach in the next 12 months. And so we want to make sure that we're protecting against that and doing our due diligence from a cybersecurity perspective, and to remain out of the headlines and to protect those the data and the people that we serve on a day-to-day basis. And so that leads me into what trends, or what the cybersecurity landscape is, what trends we're seeing in cybersecurity industry. Obviously, I can't go forward without mentioning ransomware. Ransomware is probably the one thing that every executive and board of directors are bringing up to their organizations right now. What are we doing to protect ourselves from ransomware? We don't want to be the next CNN or Fox News headline. We don't want to be the next use case or case study for why it's important to protect your environment. So ransomware is a huge trend, or a huge portion of the landscape right now, but it's just a portion, right? And it's the easiest way right now, or the path of least resistance for attackers to gain that financial motivation. Ransomware can rear its head in a lot of different forms. They can encrypt your data and hold it at ransom until you pay them. They can take it and then threaten to extortion, give that data out to third parties, post it online. They can threaten to delete it. There's a lot of areas and a lot of different groups that are focused on this. And in fact, in the last several years, there has been this emergence of ransomware as a service where you don't even have to be smart enough to build the ransomware yourself. You can go and pay for the ransomware as long as you're willing to give a portion of that financial reward back to the person that you bought the ransomware from. And so it's turned into its own business, its own industry within cybersecurity from an attack perspective. And so we want to make sure that we're protecting against that, and we'll talk about that. That leads to the next concept of attack sophistication. Back in the day, my first ransomware case that I ever worked on, it was a $500 ransom. And it was kind of a no-brainer, right? The files were encrypted, we had backups. It was going to take us several days to pull from backups. And so we decided, well, for $500, we'll see what happens. The last ransomware case I worked on was $380,000. And that changes, right, what we're going to do, because spending $500 is, a petty cash transaction, whereas anything over much more of that turns into a larger conversation. And so attack sophistication, attack cost has come up there. In the last year and a half, really, or just year alone, we've seen two of the most sophisticated attacks happen, which is the Kaseya attack, which happened over the weekend of July 4th. And then October, November of last year, there was the SolarWinds attack. And both of those were considered supply chain attacks, where an attacker got into a trusted vendor and was able to impact that vendor. And then they sent their software out to all of their customers. SolarWinds had 80% of the Fortune 500. Everybody was installing that software, and that software was an IT management software. So it gave very high privileged access to the attackers that loaded their command and control software, their connection software in all of these environments, and were able to gain access to not just SolarWinds, but the entirety of their user base to some extent. And so that type of sophistication is really what we're starting to see emerge, right? We're not seeing this basic ransomware attack anymore. It's sophisticated. People are getting into environments and understanding what's happening within that environment, and then attacking them where they're weakest. Phishing, spear phishing. Like I said, over the last week, I've gotten several emails, phone calls, right? We all get the scam phone calls about our car warranty, or even some fake donations that come through, and we get the text messages about having a package arrive. The big thing there is that right, eventually it's going to work on somebody, and so the more they blast it out, somebody's going to fall for it. Somebody's going to accidentally click a link without reading it, and those emails are coming in, and that can lead to an attacker getting access to your environment, or an attacker getting access to your email, and what we would consider a business email compromise, right? If you click on a link and give your password and somebody can log into your email, they can send emails as you. And so they have that trust of sending in a legitimate email from your account, and that can lead to what we call a business email compromise. We've seen several of those just in the past 2 weeks alone from our incident response team's perspective. And so those usually start from attacking the human element via phishing and spear phishing. Spear phishing is just another term for targeted phishing that we would use. And typically when you see spear phishing, you're going after a big whale or something like that. And so spear phishing is focused towards the C-level executives, the board of directors, VPs, anybody with an elevated title or a VIP title. That's what we talk about when we do spear phishing. It's not a blast of emails to the entire organization. It's just a few select, because once we gain access to email from a VIP, there comes with that a lot more implicit trust within the organization. The CEO sends an email, but it's actually a malicious actor, but it's coming from the CEO's email. You tend to get a quicker response from those types of attacks. And then the last trend that I'll touch on is the growing attack surface. And this is, attack surface is a term we use within cybersecurity, but it's basically just our growing technology footprint. And we call it the attack surface because that is what it is from an attacker's perspective or a hacker's perspective. It's growing and we have access to attack it. And what this means is over the last decade, we've seen a transition from just a desktop or laptop computer to a cell phone, a smartwatch, a smart thermometer in your house or thermostat. I have a smart carbon dioxide detector. I have a smart refrigerator and washing machine and dishwasher. They all text me when the load is done, or I can rerun the load from my phone without having to get out of bed in the middle of the night. And so these types of things grow the attack surface. And most people are thinking, well, what does that have to do with my organization? Well, in March of 2020, a lot of people went and transformed to work from home or transitioned to work from home. And that opened up every organization to a greater attack surface as well. Your work laptops were connecting from home, and if the proper security controls weren't in place, that home network then had access to the data that was on that system. And so we have to be cognizant of what we're implementing on our computers as we're transforming and transitioning to work from home, because it is bringing in that growing attack surface into our own work environment. One of the examples I use is, my kids play video games all the time on their laptops, right? I think Minecraft is a huge game nowadays for kids, and they get on there and they're downloading updates to it, but they're just trying to hack the software so they can do more and more things, and that's opening their computer up to ransomware and their computer up to an attacker gaining a foothold within my home network. If an attacker gets access to my son's computer, that opens them up to maintain that persistence across my home network. And if they identify that I have a work laptop and my home network, it opens up then my work environment to that. And so making sure that we have those right controls in place to prevent that from happening on our work computers is vital. I'll move on to our next polling question here and take a sip of water. Are you familiar with your organization's cybersecurity response plan? We often call this an incident response plan, business continuity plans, as well as disaster recovery plans. Yes, 46%. That's really great. There's a statistic that we'll go over about this later within this presentation that talks about the savings of being prepared. And I'll move through here. I'm running out of time. I did want to bring up some statistics that we're seeing in the healthcare industry. In the last year, cyber attacks in the healthcare industry have increased 55%. Cyber attackers are not stupid. To some extent, they're going to attack the most vulnerable industries. And what has happened over the last 18 months has made the healthcare industry a very vulnerable industry from a cyber attack perspective. We've been focusing more on a pandemic than we have on our cybersecurity. And so it's opened up and created risk for the healthcare industry. With specifically to the healthcare industry, on average, an attacker will live within within the network for 96 days. Before they are identified. And then it will take 236 days to recover from that malicious breach. And that includes a lot of things. That's just not the technical side. That's identifying the data that was stolen, identifying the repercussions of the stolen data. There are fines associated with that. The average cost per record in the healthcare industry is about $400 per record. And that's higher than most other industries. The average cost of a PII record outside of the healthcare industry is typically around $150 per record from a fine perspective. In 2020, based on the Poneman Institute, the average cost of a breach worldwide was $3.86 million. It actually dropped a fraction of a percent. They attributed that to the preparation of organizations to prepare for a breach. The U.S. carries the highest fine when it comes to a breach of about $8.6 million on average. And healthcare remains the most expensive industry from a breach perspective within the United States. In 2020, 26 million patient records were stolen as well, which goes back to why it's so important to protect our data. Impacts of a security breach, right? We've touched on this a little bit, but right, exposed employee or personal information that can lead to dissatisfaction from a business perspective and from an internal perspective of your employees, right? Lost, inaccessible, or compromised customer and company data, your intellectual property, your secretive data, if you will, can get stolen. Systems can go down, this denial of service. If you don't have access to your systems, you can't accept payments, you can't identify life-saving treatment information, you can't access your prescription dosing machines. Those types of things are all issues. And here it says it can lead to brain damage, but within the within the healthcare industry, it can lead to a lot more than just brain damage. This is life and limb industry, and so it's vital that we're protecting our systems. Strain on internal resources, right? When you suffer from a breach, right, everybody goes into panic mode, which is why it's important to be prepared. But that can lead to strain from internal resources, employee loss of that tribal knowledge as they leave as well, and then unplanned costs due to compromised environment. It's not just paying fines. There are legal implications as well as just the cost to recover, paying the right people to do the right things within your environment to recover from a breach. Data breaches are on the rise. 54% of companies have experienced one or more cyber attacks in the last 12 months, and that's just continuing as we move forward into the future. And so here we'll talk about best practices. Bailey has come up with a pyramid of best practices, starting with stage 1 and moving all the way up to stage 5 to implement in your organization to help prevent a cyber attack. Our ebook is coming out with this data in it that talks a great deal more about these different stages, but we focus on foundational security. And then once we have some foundational aspects in place from an IT and cybersecurity perspective, we move into deriving policies and building awareness within our organization. And that involves doing assessments of your organization and understanding where you have gaps in your current policies and where you can implement stronger controls. Once policies are in place, that answers the why we're doing it. The how we do it is building the processes. How are we going to do asset management? How are we going to do vulnerability management and configuration management within our organization? How are we going to secure our remote workforce? Once we have those processes in place, time to start talking about incident response. How can we prepare for an incident? And it's vital that we prepare for it. And so building an IR plan, testing that IR plan, and then training your teams by testing it, and having a team identified to respond are vital to a quick recovery from a cybersecurity incident or breach. From there, security monitoring. Having your environment monitored on a 24/7 basis to monitor for the anomalies, seeing what threats might be coming through your environment and responding to those anomalies as they come through, defining the known good and acting on the not good. And so here's a statistic around being prepared, and I talked about it, right? Organizations that have an IR team identified to respond have the plan and processes in place and then exercise that plan. And when we talk about exercising it, that's called a tabletop exercise. You sit around a table with the key resources. These are not just IT people. This is legal, this is human resources, public relations, sitting around a table, all walking through what your plan is. And doing different scenarios to make sure that you can respond effectively. There's a cost savings of about 40% on a data breach. The sooner that you can respond and recover from a breach, the less an organization has to pay in a data breach. And so you prevent records from leaving your environment, and you're able to respond appropriately from there. So that is one of the most telling statistics that we have from a cybersecurity perspective. How to do that? What's the best way to go about it? We have a basic methodology. I'm a huge fan of cyclical processes here that anybody can implement, and it's just assess, integrate, and maintain. It's AIM, AIM, aim for cybersecurity hygiene. And so when you're assessing, you're discovering what weaknesses you have, you're prioritizing those weaknesses, and you're building a strategy to respond or remediate those weaknesses. The next is to integrate or act on those assessments and understandings, the weaknesses that you've discovered. You configure your environment, you configure new tools, you remediate the findings from a penetration test per se, and then you validate those findings, and then you maintain those. Right, you manage your environment, you respond to anomalies as they come through, and that helps build that prevention. And then you start it all over. You want to continuously assess. Cybersecurity is not a destination, it is a journey. And you're going to be walking on this journey as long as the internet exists and data is continuously being created within all of our organizations. Here's a sample incident response process. It's also on our website, and you can download it. It's just a high-level process of what would happen within incident response. Scoping, identifying what's happening, detecting the anomalies that are happening within your network, investigating those and containing those, making sure that containment is a huge portion. All right, whoever's devices are impacted, taking those offline for the time being, making sure that we're able to understand what's happening so that it doesn't keep spreading throughout the environment, eradicating what we've contained and what we've identified, and then recovering from that. Not just going back to where we were, but going back to a better state from a cybersecurity perspective, right? We don't just want to say, all right, we've eradicated what has happened. It's business as usual from here. It's identifying how can we prevent this from happening again as well. And that comes in the lessons learned and doing an assessment to understand what is most important to implement to prevent this and other similar attacks from happening again. From there, we'll go to our last polling question, or my last polling question. Do you have a trusted partner in the industry to help develop policies and plans for your organization? This can be somebody within your organization. It can be a third party that you've utilized. There are a lot of templates out there. I'm happy to walk anybody through what those templates are and talk through the importance of each of the individual ones as well. And that's a great perspective we have here. 2/3 of participants are saying, yes, we have a trusted partner, somebody that we can rely on to help us through our cybersecurity hygiene and building a greater posture within cybersecurity. So it's great to see that, that number here. And so from here, I'll pass it over to David to talk more about HiTrust and information security frameworks.
Excellent, thank you. All right, so the three that we're going to touch on here within this specific series is HIPAA, HiTrust, and NIST. I'm not going to spend much time on HIPAA, as I'm guessing most everybody is aware of the security rule, but I will dive into HiTrust pretty deep, and there's a nice overview of the NIST Cybersecurity Framework as well. You know, when you're building out a cyber information security framework or a network or trying to address these things, it's always good to have a background or a set of standards to try to align yourself with to make sure that you're covering all your bases. HIPAA security rule, that's been around for a while, and it's really designed to protect your PHI data from the following threats, and it's broken into 3 different areas. We have administrative safeguards, physical safeguards, and then your technical, more strategic safeguards. In addition, HIPAA has come out with what's called the HIPAA privacy rule, which is based around your privacy department and rules and regulations around that. I'm going to go deeper into HiTrust. HiTrust has been around for a while, and when they first came out with their framework, it's a common security framework that's built upon multiple frameworks. They designed it to really target the and focus on the healthcare industry. So they're looking at PHI and PHI data. It's not a standard or regulation, but again, it's a scalable framework that builds upon other regulatory type of items. So if you need to comply with PCI or any state or federal regulations, you can add in specific factors that are relative to your environment, and you can build your control framework based on that. So how was HiTrust built? It was built, you know, it started with ISO 27001, which is really an industry and global framework designed to plan and detect and monitor your environment. And so the thought with ISO is you're really trying to take a holistic view of your cybersecurity and information security environments, plan it, implement it, check on it, and make sure that information security cycle and department is doing their work, and then they want you to measure it as well. So they're really taking a holistic view. And then as it began to mature, they added multiple layers to it. So they started adding PCI to it. They made sure that everything is HIPAA compliant. So they added the security rule, and then they started building upon regulatory factors to make sure that we can, you know, address multiple different regulatory requirements within one tool. So if you break it down, the CSF is itself, it's based off of control categories, control objectives, and their individual controls, which are called implementation requirements. If you break that down even further, the 14 categories, there's 13 security categories and 1 privacy category. There are 46 control objectives, and then there's 149 controls, 135 which are security, and then 14 are privacy. When you do a HiTrust certification, you are required to at least do 75 of those base security controls. And as you build out that assessment, each implementation may develop into multiple requirement statements. And so these are the 13 categories, high-level categories within HiTrust. They range everywhere from information security all the way through privacy. You know, if you're taking a look at everything within an information security cycle, you're wanting to touch on everything. So human resources security, risk management, information security, compliance, asset management, physical, business continuity management, and information security incident management. When you build out your actual certification, as this is a framework, as I said, it's very scalable, and it's intended to take on multiple regulations. So you build on your base 75 or potentially 145 HiTrust controls, and then you also add in all these different regulatory factors. So when you break it all down and you do the actual assessment, they break that down into 19 different domains when you're actually doing the assessment. And within each one of these domains, you will have either one or multiple different implementation levels and implementation requirements that they have. And it's very specific, it's very granular, it's very black and white in what they really want you to do. And so there is no real kind of gray area with this. It's very black and white, and they want to make sure that you are really implementing things at a very specific implementation level. They're very specific when it gets to that. These are some of the standards and regulations that are also a part of that HiTrust foundation. So you've got everywhere from ISO, you know, and then you get down to some of your specific state regulatory agencies and PCI as well. All right. So let's talk about NIST a little bit. This is another very common framework that we see in industry. It was put out by the National Institute of Standards and Technology and breaks things into 5 specific areas: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Very similar to Michael's AIM type of strategy. So the first one is identify. You really want to make sure you're understanding your environment. What are the assets you have? What's your business environment? What are the different tools that you're utilizing within your business? The different softwares, the databases, and the infrastructure. Do you have any governance requirements that you have to comply with? Are you performing a risk assessment? And what is your strategy as a business as it relates to risk? Are we looking at business from a pure technological perspective, or are we looking at from an enterprise type of level? And are those risks being communicated from higher levels of your organization, from the C-suite all the way down to that more tactical layer? So when we're really looking at, you know, identifying risks and understanding your environment with this identify stage. The next is protecting that environment. After we've identified the things that we want to protect, we go into the protect level. And so we're looking at access control, some of the awareness training that Michael talked about earlier, data security, maintenance, and protective technology. So what are the technical aspects that we're doing to protect the information and the data? The next 3 are detect, respond, and recover. Detecting is, you know, what are the monitoring tools that we have in our environment to detect any kind of anomalies or events? Are we doing any continuous monitoring or detection process? Do we have those things in place? If we detect something, are we going to be able to respond to it? Do we have a response plan in place? What are the communication strategies that we have to make sure that both internally and externally we're responding to this accordingly? Are we doing any, you know, post-mortem analysis and any mitigation strategies and improvements are built into that respond area. Recovery is making sure that we do plan our recovery. So we are retesting these strategies over and over. Do we have any improvements that can come out of that, specific response category? And then are we communicating again, internally, externally, to make sure that we have recovered appropriately? Again, if you're thinking about security, as I said before, we want to make sure that we're setting the tone at the top. And so as we're building this process, we want to make sure that everything aligns from that board level all the way down to that tactical level. Are we talking about risk on a regular basis with our organization? Are our board members and our C-suite aware of the risks that are out there? And are the communication strategies developed in which that our organization communicate from the top to the bottom? There is an internal audit impact as well. Each one of you have a significant impact on your organization. As we have said over and over again, security is not a one-size-fits-all proposition. We want to build a security strategy into your controls framework. So again, if we have a control framework that we're working with, we want to make sure that information security is built into that. We want to monitor it, plan, do, check, act, and then the process never sleeps. So continue monitoring and continuing to impact and understand your environment. I think that takes me to the end of my presentation. Scott, do you want to close it up?
Yep, I'm just hopping back on here. Thank you. Yeah, and just a couple thoughts. Thank you, Michael and David, for your comments. Obviously, as they mentioned, there's certainly a lot going on in any industry. Healthcare has some unique aspects, given the fact that some of the cybersecurity bad actors out there can also disrupt operations and services and medical equipment, and that obviously kind of raises the risk even higher. I think it's important for all of you, as we have a few takeaways here, to the extent you implement and monitor your cybersecurity practices, you can help lower risk. Number one, from the standpoint of having these incidences, but also I think people in the healthcare industry are faced with the additional risk of that public risk of what happened and what were you doing, and were you doing the things you should be doing, and were you monitoring them? And if those things aren't in place, you can be criticized not for having the policies in place. Not so much anymore that you had a cyber incident, because we all know that it's a common thing, and it's everyone is being attacked on a continuous basis. But having those policies and procedures in place to respond to incidences, as well as the monitoring process in place. I think Michael talked earlier a little bit about incident response. I think that's become more and more important, particularly with ransomware. How are you going to respond, and how quickly, and what are the steps you can take? If something like that happens, you tend not to have a lot of time to think about it and make a decision. And we all know that all of us can spend a lot of time in meetings and deciding what to do. But in these situations, you just don't have a lot of time, and you have to make some decisions pretty quickly, and you have to have the people in place that you can bring in on short notice to help you respond to those things. So that's probably the other thing to think about. The other thing I'd mention too, and both Michael and David talked about this, but the governance aspect, I think, is really important in healthcare industry, and really any industry. A lot of us, have grown up, and I'm one of those who grown up where technology and some of the social media and other types of access just weren't there. And oftentimes you see that type of experience in the leadership levels and at the board level. So to those of you that are in internal audit compliance or leadership positions, I think it's always good to challenge yourself as to whether the governance side has been looked at. Do you have expertise not only within management, but also at the board level that can ask those questions and make sure that the organization is appropriately considering the risk and addressing any risks that are out there. I think the last question that we raised, I think, is important, whether it be internal audit or through your information security operations. Having a plan to review your controls and processes are important, and also having a risk assessment done and reviewed and periodically is important to understand your vulnerabilities. I think with the pandemic, we all learned that things move pretty quickly, and there probably are new and emerging risks that have occurred as a result of broader remote working environments, et cetera. I know in talking to some of my clients, and oftentimes I'm probably closer to some of the finance people, they were struggling because the organization was really spending time making sure the operating people had right access, they had the right data capacity to handle a more remote environment. So, and telehealth obviously is part of that as well. So anyway, a lot of things to think about. I think it's important to have a good plan in place to keep this high on your agenda around assessing risks, understanding where those risks are and how you're managing risks, and then really monitoring them are real important as you move forward. So Amy, with that, I think we can open up to questions. If people want to unmute themselves, or if they want to send something into a chat bar, that's fine too. Otherwise, I think that takes us about to the end of our presentation today.
All right, so if you do want to be unmuted, just raise your hand. I can unmute you. Feel free to use the chat or the Q&A option. They're all just processing this wonderful information, so I'm sure everyone will be thinking of questions later, and if you do, feel free to reach out.
You got our contact information there. The last item I'll mention, Amy, and I'll give people a chance in case they do have a question, is again, just to remind them about our webinar series that we do have in place for health systems individuals, those particularly in internal audit and compliance. The next session, again, just as another reminder, is October 29th. Going to focus on data analytics and revenue cycle and how to use that in your compliance and internal audit function. And then on November 8th, we'll be talking about physician relationships and compliance risks associated with that. We have a panel of healthcare evaluation people, healthcare consultants, and an attorney on that panel. So that we're certainly excited about that group as well. So with that, I don't have anything else unless there's a question out there. I see, Amy, you popped up the registration link for the audience, so thank you.
Of course. Well, I don't see any questions, so we will go ahead and give everyone some time back in their day. Thank you all so much for attending. Thank you to our presenters, and we will see you guys next time. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.